It's time for Trench Talk for your weekly infusion of metal and otherwise heavy music. I am your host, Flight of Icarus from MetalTrenches.com. If you're new here, please do hit that subscribe button and give us a like if you enjoy what we're doing. And it is high time we talk about UK band Venom Prison and their second album, much awaited, Samsara, via Prosthetic Records. The album is actually named after the Buddhist concept of being reborn into a never-ending cycle of suffering. Says the band, Samsara is more aggressive, yet unashamed of dynamics. It recognizes that in order to feel impact, you must have suspense. To feel the hate and aggression behind low-ended discord, you must feel the relief of layered melodic swells. Very true. Frontwoman Larissa Stupar adds, lyrically, Samsara is a more personal offering as a vocalist. I wanted to talk about my own experiences of suffering and rebirth. I want to sing about things that matter to me. It is a political thread of fury that delivers a lashing in the direction of human trafficking, forced surrogacy, capital punishment, and the dismal trail of destruction left by societal architects and rulers. And while she definitely has some strong political beliefs that she's made no apologies about, her and her bandmates are strong enough songwriters that it never distracts from the overall quality of the music itself. And that's always kind of a concern of mine. I'm fine with people believe in different things. People have messages that they want to talk about in their lyrics. But to me, the mark of a true quality songwriter is that they can put that into their music and that's their meaning for them. But there's still enough ambiguity so that listeners can develop their own personal meaning and attachment to these tracks. The band won the Metal Hammer Golden Gods Award for Best New Band in 2017 with their debut album Animus, and have since toured with the likes of Trivium, Code Orange, Aborted, and Power Trip. But to be honest, Samsara blows their debut out of the water, if you ask me. Despite the buzz around it, Animus was an album that never really resonated with me. I thought it was fine, and I appreciated the sheer heaviness of it. There were certain tracks that I definitely enjoyed. And then, of course, there was the infamous album art. But something about the overall songwriting kind of left me feeling unimpressed. It felt kind of clunky with a lot of different ideas just sort of cudgeled together and not enough order to it all. So in that, Samsara is a massive step forwards. Now, make no mistake, this album still tackles a lot of different styles, and as such, it's really difficult to cleanly classify. I often seen them simply tagged as death metal, and there's certainly plenty of that, but also so much more. There's technical death metal, black metal, hardcore, grindcore, and even some thrash metal on display. And it's largely full speed ahead throughout the whole thing, but how that speed is presented can vary quite a bit. And this is exactly where the sophomore effort really outdoes its predecessor. Flow and consistency. Where the debut found all these styles kind of clashing and vying for attention, Samsara has found them working together in this really strange kind of harmony. There's still room for improvement there, but it's a massive upgrade for just one album cycle. So let's listen to a couple of examples so you can really hear just how much this album runs the gamut in terms of what you're going to get. Tracks like Uterine Industrialization had me reflecting on the dark crossover fury of Power Trip. Punk attitude and thrash riffs unite with D-beat for a seriously rollicking experience. Then there's the beatdown, brutality, and slaughtering breakdowns of implementing the metaphysics of morals. Great track name. This one sounds like it would be right at home on Code Orange's Forever, actually. And rightly so, because one of the producers on this album is someone who had previously worked with both Code Orange and Power Trip. And like I said, too, they've done some touring with them, so clearly sounds rubbing off on them. And finally, you've got to love the seriously pissed off black metal-ish vocals and raging tremolo lines of self-inflicted violence. This is a very BM-infused track that goes in a lot of other directions too, but there's definitely this very strong foundation of just traditional black metal approach. So throughout the album, all these elements intermingle in this sickening kind of orgy of extremity that defies a clear for-fan selection, which is why I didn't even bother to do one this time. Really, the closest comparison I could think of was perhaps Immortal Bird. Definitely some parallels there in that it's a very eclectic band stylistically. There's a lot of grind and black and death metal all kind of mixed together. And then, of course, they've got a fantastic female frontwoman on that band as well. But even that doesn't fully capture it. This band is pretty unique. So, regarding scoring, I gave them an 8 for innovation. Again, lots of familiar elements coming together here, but again, combined very effectively and representing a big leap forward for the band. It's a 9 for musicianship, lots of great technical performances and standout moments, but still just a little room to tighten things up moving forward. And a 9 for enjoyability. There are some hiccups here and there that keep me from putting this in my top tier, but I still had a surprisingly hard time moving it out of my listening rotation. So all that for a total score of 8.7, which is a nice B+, and I'd say that's a full letter grade improvement from Animus. Either way, if you dug Animus, you'll probably love this too, but for those of you out there eyeing this with some uncertainty, you're kind of like, I don't know, I'm not sure, either because you didn't like that other album, or are maybe just wary about some of the feminist messaging. I've talked to some fans out there like that have that specific concern going into this album, but even for those people, I still highly recommend giving it a listen. Bottom line, it's just a great metal album that did exactly what it's supposed to do. Get me banging my head. I didn't really give a shit about anything else when it came to this one. It was heavy as fuck, and it'll speak for itself in that regard. It doesn't insist on itself in terms of any particular kind of messaging. And frankly, again, I love the track names. They're so over the top, and I can't help but get a chuckle out of some of them. So Samsara, Venom Prison. This is coming out via Prosthetic Records on March 15th. Alright, moving on, I've got a couple shout-outs for you this week. First up is New York progressive death metal band Contrarian with their new album Their Worm Never Dies via Willowtip Records. Contrarian is one of those rare bands that still kind of captures the essence of the 90s death metal vibe. I'd recommend them for fans of Cynic, Mithras, and Horrendous. And while there are a few kind of nostalgia bands floating around, none of them really impress me to the same degree as Contrarian. Because unlike groups like Gruesome that seem very much kind of focused on imitating a specific sound, Contrarian just seem to start writing, and what comes out of them just happens to end up sounding like those old albums. It almost sounds as if these guys were born in the wrong era. I was already very impressed with the 2017 album To Perceive Is to Suffer, and Their Worm Never Dies is another solid release in the same vein. Listening to this takes me back to my first times hearing albums like Dark Tranquillity's The Gallery, or later discovering Cynic's material, but these guys are taking that sound to a different level entirely. Check it out. Next up, we've got a ripping new split between UK hardcore mathcore groups Sense Offender and Pupil Slicer. And while back in the day, I never really used to pick up EPs, because who wants to pay $7 for, 3 or 4 songs in a hard copy? But now, with the digital age, these short releases really are just as viable as full lengths. And that should definitely be the case for this new split. Even though it's only 11 minutes and 4 tracks, there's no time wasted at all. Sense Offender's side is intense with really sludgy vocals and even a few death growls thrown in there, matched up with pummeling beats and metallic riffs. And it really does live up to the track names of being godless. Absolutely monstrous stuff with kind of a tinge of that darkened Scandinavian hardcore aesthetic. And then Pupil Slicer balances it out with a little more of a straightforward hardcore approach, snarling, higher-pitched vocals, emphasis on more of kind of DIY sound in the production, but still plenty of intensity and metal influence to go around. No less impactful. All around fantastic and really abrasive stuff. It's definitely early in 2019, but this is my favorite split release so far, and it's absolutely worthy of your hard-earned money. I'd recommend this to fans of Botch, Eglise, and Vane. Check it out. We've also got a lean and mean third LP from Baltimore grindcore thrash death metal outfit Noisem. This is their new album Cease to Exist, out via $20 spin. I'd recommend Noisem to fans of Repulsion, Noisem, and Mammoth Grinder. And what can I really say about this release other than it is just fast and hard and ugly? It's really fun, there's no frills, lots of D-beat, plenty of great riffs, start to finish enjoyable, no filler. I'd say the first half is a little bit stronger than the second half, but for the most part, I'm having a great time just blasting this thing on full volume. But yeah, anyways, total rager. These guys don't fuck around. Just check it out. All right, so before I close this thing out, I feel like this is as good a time as any to talk about the new Fallujah album. In case you don't know, Fallujah are a progressive death metal band that have really been picking up steam over the past few years. They definitely blew up with the album The Flesh Prevails, and then followed that up with what I thought was an even better album, which was Dreamless. And then after that, their longtime vocalist dropped out. And so this now, their fourth album, Undying Light, coming via Nuclear Blast Records, is the first to feature their new vocalist, Anthony Palermo. So really the question on everyone's lips seems to be, how does Anthony stack up to Alex? And I've seen a couple early reviews really talking about that aspect of it, and even saying that kind of Anthony's approach ruins the whole album for them. So I thought I'd share that I don't feel that way at all. Anthony's approach is definitely very different from Alex's, but to be honest, I never came to Fallujah for vocals in the first place. Alex's growls on the albums were really kind of the least interesting aspect of it for me. I very much came to these albums looking for amazing riffs and dense atmosphere, great drumming, great technical performances, strong songwriting overall. So when Alex left, I was kind of like, whatever, vocalist dime a dozen, especially just your kind of standard death metal growler. So while, if you feel differently and you are really invested in what Alex was bringing to the table, I could see how you'd have problems with Anthony, because while I wouldn't say Anthony's better or worse, he's just different. Whereas Alex had that really low register, echoing, kind of reverb heavy death growl, Anthony has much more of a high-pitched shriek that I'd compare to kind of more of a metalcore frontman. And so don't get me wrong, this album does not go in a metalcore direction. I'm just saying that his vocal approach in particular reminds me of other metalcore vocalists. But if you ask me, it works fine. I don't have a problem with it. It's definitely different. It joins with the music in a different way, but I'm not really here for the vocals. I'm here for the guitars and the drums and all that great stuff. And there's still definitely a lot of that here, but honestly, that's where this album falls short for me. I'm kind of burying the lead here, but I'll just throw it out there. This is my least favorite Fallujah album so far. I don't hate it. I don't think it's a bad album. I think there's still plenty of good things about it, plenty of things to enjoy. There's still some really cool guitar parts on here, some really great melodic solos. And when they get it right, they get it right. There's tracks like Eyes Like the Sun that are still prime examples of really solid, dynamic song structuring that let those more explosive moments really pop. But largely, again, Anthony's the least of my concerns with this album. It's really the returning members. I feel like the performances and the songwriting have really taken a step back. Riffs just feel less engaging. I finished this album, and while I enjoy it while I'm listening, 5 minutes later, I couldn't really hum you a single tune. They're just not super memorable. And even more than that, a lot of parts just feel a lot more streamlined this time around. It kind of reminded me of when I first heard the newest Gojira album. And, obviously they've taken a pretty strong turn from the more progressive and intricate songwriting to a pretty much straightforward rock approach. This album doesn't represent quite as extreme of a jump, but it's definitely there, and enough so that I can't listen to this album without thinking about that. I just find myself missing all of those, again, really consistently dynamic, effects-laden passages, and it would get really quiet and atmospheric. And I also associate Fallujah with this strange contradiction of kind of light and dark and loudness and quietness. And, even when they're in kind of full tilt and they are a very heavy band, there's just something so relaxing and even kind of meditative about it. I listen to this music and it just makes me kind of drift away into the clouds, which is really cool. And this album still has some of that, but just not to the same degree. And again, because of that, the louder portions, the harder portions just don't pop as much because there's just not enough of that subtle finessing of the songwriting to make it work in that same way. I'm thinking about past songs like Adrenaline that has so many ups and downs and so many twists and turns that kind of keep you guessing, and it's very exciting. I couldn't name you a song in this album that really genuinely gets me excited. I also found myself really missing Tori Letzler's backup vocals on this album. She pops up a few times on Dreamless and really added so much to, again, the overall dynamics and especially just that sense of atmosphere. That soothing, meditative aspect was further amplified by her gorgeous singing voice, and it really offset Alex's more harsh ones. And so again, there was kind of a give and take and a back and forth going on there. And she's nowhere to be found on this one. It's very much just kind of the band doing their thing. Again, much more straightforward. And I've listened to it several times now, kind of hoping I'll like it more each time. And to some degree I do, but it's just never taken off. And now it's been a couple days as I'm recording this since I've listened to it again. And once more, nothing really jumps out in my mind. I depend on an album having those key moments that just stick with me. I'm thinking off the top of my head of just so many times where I was talking about an album and there was like a specific part just stuck in my head that I had to talk about. I don't have any of those for Undying Light. So even though it's a perfectly fine album, it's enjoyable to listen to. There's really nothing quote unquote wrong with it. The performances that are there are pretty solid. There's no like clunky songwriting. It's just noticeably less interesting. And as a result, it just can't hold a candle up to Dreamless or The Flesh Prevails. I ended up giving it still like a B- because it's, from a musicianship point of view, still pretty above average compared to most of the music out there. And it's still pretty enjoyable, but in a way that kind of makes it more frustrating to me. I almost wish that it was just a terrible album that I could ignore and just write off and not think about. But because, as I put it in my written review, these guys have basically been coasting on a 4.0 GPA, and now they've marred that perfect score forever. It's like when you go and you take a written driver's test and you know you only missed passing by 1 point. I would much rather know that like I completely blew it than know that if I had just gotten that one question right, I would have passed it. Like, that irritates me more. And that's just how this feels to me. So as always, I encourage you, though, to check it out for yourself, form your own opinion. I'm sure there are plenty of people out there that are going to think differently than me. There may be people that go out and listen to this and say it's their favorite Fallujah album of all time, and that's perfectly fine. I'd encourage you to check out tracks like Eyes Like the Sun, Departure, and Last Light. Those were my personal favorites. But yeah, this is ultimately just my opinion, and I'm interested to hear on our social media in the comments, if you're on YouTube, in the comments section there, what you thought about this, if you agreed, if you disagreed. It's always interesting to have more of a discussion on it, because God knows I am not the end-all be-all of opinions on music, and I frequently get it wrong, too. So I think that'll wrap it up for this episode of Trench Talk. Hope you end up going out and checking Venom Prison or any of those other shout-outs. Let us know if you are interested in this further discussion of Fallujah at the end. As always, if you haven't already, please do subscribe to the channel. If you enjoyed listening to this, please do give us a like or a rating, depending on what platform you're on. You can also find us on social media on Facebook, Twitter, Vero, Instagram, and I just added our account on Minds.com as well. I encourage you to follow us there because supposedly the algorithm actually makes it easier for you to actually see what we're posting instead of it getting filtered through all sorts of other stuff. If you really like what we're doing here, you want to support us financially, you can check out our Patreon account. But thank you so much for listening and the ongoing support. It really means the world to me. Nothing makes my day better than getting a message or an email from a fan just saying, hey man, because of Metal Trenches, I found all sorts of new bands and I bought all these amazing CDs this year and I'm so grateful to know about these things that I didn't know about before. And that's really what it's all about for me. I want to help these bands get the exposure they deserve, make the money they deserve for their hard work, and be encouraged to continue making great music. So, this is Flight of Icarus signing off, and I will see you in the trenches.